Welcome to Gideon's Promise, the podcast. In the landmark 1963 decision Gideon v. Wainwright, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled every person accused of a crime in America must be provided a lawyer, regardless of their ability to pay. This podcast is about the people that uphold that promise, public defenders. These dedicated lawyers give voice to 80% of the people thrown into the system, and yet in the national discussion regarding justice reform, public defenders are largely overlooked. This show centers public defenders in that conversation. We will explore the critical role public defenders play in addressing a wide range of issues facing marginalized communities with subject matter experts, key opinion leaders, and people impacted by the American criminal legal system. Listen as a community of advocates discuss their work to strengthen public defenders and transform public defense. 16 years ago, the devastation of Hurricane Katrina resulted in over 1,800 deaths in Louisiana. Fast forward to today, Gulf residents were struck by Hurricane Ida this year. The results of Katrina and Ida are analogous to what we see in the criminal legal system. These hurricanes impacted everyone, but disproportionately economically disadvantaged people of color. Today, mass incarceration, as we all know it, is a man-made crisis. Mass incarceration continues to illuminate the racial and economic inequalities in this country and play a role in the high incarceration rates in the state of Louisiana.
Yeah, so my first introduction really to New Orleans, other than just going there as a tourist, was just about 15 years ago. I came to New Orleans as the training director for the new public defender office being built in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And that's where I really got to know our guest today, Derwyn Bunton. At the time, Derwyn was a member of the board of the Indigent Defender Program and was one of the leaders in ushering in reform. Derwyn was used to the way things worked in New Orleans. I wasn't. I remember when I first got there, I was absolutely shocked to see a system that had depended on contract lawyers, part-time public defenders, lawyers managing caseloads, sometimes of 1,000 cases per attorney. And what really struck me was the culture that had developed in New Orleans because of these low expectations.
And Rap, you talk about that. I really didn't understand what was happening post-Katrina in 2005 in New Orleans until I got an opportunity to read your book. And in your book, you discuss what you saw post-Katrina. And the reason I bring this up is we're going to talk to Derwyn about, are these same things plaguing New Orleans today after the most recent hurricane and how it's impacted the criminal legal system. So in your book, Rap, you tell this story and you say, I had a conversation with one of the lawyers who had been a public defender for approximately 1 year. I had finished conducting a training session on the importance of developing client relations and discussed how the relationship can benefit case preparation. The lawyer approached me to say he had never thought of the issues raised. He never saw client relations as central to the representation. He was brought up to believe that you spend just enough time with the client to keep him from complaining so you can be left alone to work on his case. He felt like he had been ineffective for not considering these lessons previously. He said it is easy for a new lawyer to simply adapt to the way things are being done and to consider the status quo the standard of representation that they should strive to achieve. Rap, you say the attitudes I had witnessed from public defenders were not unlike those I had been exposed to previously. For the first time, however, I spent my days immersed in the very culture that produced this mindset. My time in New Orleans helped me understand how structural and financial pressures can create a culture that would not be so easy to change. As the lawyers learned to practice without investigators and experts, a shoot from the hip attitude became the norm. Without sufficient time to meet with clients and prepare outside court, triage could easily be mistaken for representation. But what's so interesting, Rap, and I read that, I said, oh my God, how did we get from that point to what I see New Orleans as today?
Derwyn Bunton.
It was Derwyn Bunton and his team of mighty advocates. Our guest today has had a front row seat to the trials and triumphs of rebuilding the Orleans Public Defender Office, rebuilding the defense infrastructure, and was integral in the recovery process, not only after Katrina, but also after this recent Hurricane Ida. We are so excited to have our longtime friend, Derwyn Bunton, Chief Defender of the Orleans Public Defender, on our podcast today. Let me tell you a little bit about Derwyn, if you haven't already heard. Derwyn and Rap worked together in the early 2000s in the Orleans Public Defender. Derwyn is the first Black Chief Defender for New Orleans, a role he has served in for over 10 years. He was the first member of his family to attend college. He is a graduate of San Diego State University and New York School of Law. After law school, Derwyn decided to move to New Orleans to join the Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana to fight juvenile mass incarceration. Derwyn was part of a team that reduced the Louisiana juvenile prison population from over 2,000 children being incarcerated to less than 350 during his tenure, and closed 2 prisons. Under Derwyn's leadership, the Orleans Public Defenders have received numerous accolades, including recognition by the Innocence Project of New Orleans, the Frederick Douglass Human Rights Award from the Southern Center for Human Rights, and the prestigious National Legal Aid and Defender Association Clara Shortridge Folks Award, given every 2 years to the most outstanding public defender office in the nation. Can I repeat that? The most outstanding PD office in the nation. In 2020, Derwyn was named the chairman of the National Association for Public Defense. And even more importantly, and why he is here for us, his office has been a partner with Gideon's Promise for over 14 years.
And we really want to talk about how client-centered representation, how community-oriented public defense can really help drive legislative action that can lead to ending mass incarceration and promoting true transformative justice. So we're going to have that conversation. But before we do, Derwyn, I want to just acknowledge, I know you recently lost your mother, who was your rock. I want to tell you how much we are all thinking about you and sending love to you and your family. And we also want to recognize that happens in the wake of Hurricane Ida, when everyone in New Orleans and other impacted areas are dealing with so much. So before we start, I want to just check in and tell you that we love you and sort of just ask how you're doing.
Well, I'm hanging in there. I'm gonna be out in California for a week, and so glad I was able to make this work, and I was so glad that y'all asked me to be a part of the podcast. I don't get to see as much of y'all as I would like these days. COVID has crushed all the in-person stuff, and
Yeah.
I miss those gatherings. So, but yeah, I'm hanging in there. It's going to be a great sort of celebration of life for my mom. My mom, was one of those millions of stories of Black women who just are fixtures in their community, raising a family, and doing it with ferocity. I posted, a tribute on Facebook, but there's like a million stories of my mom. If you ever wonder where I get my fight from, it's from my mom. So there's a million of those stories of my mom just not taking any nonsense, but also standing up for folks who weren't there to stand up for themselves. So it's going to be fun going back home.
Taking about just that story about your mom, and the last thing you said was standing up for people, right? Standing up for communities and people who couldn't necessarily stand up for themselves. You and OPD, right, have really evolved the office into a community supportive office, right? OPD in the past had very bad narrative about the office being terrible, that the defenders didn't care about the people they serve, right? How has OPD played a greater role in advancing like legislative changes that help the people that your public defenders serve? Like, number one, why did you move in that direction? And what have you done in the last few years to gain the community trust that led to some of the great legislation that's happened in the city of New Orleans?
Well, to the first question, why we moved in that direction is simply the experience of fighting in court, fighting for clients and their families gives you victories within the rules. There are rights that everyone has. There are procedures everyone can take advantage of. But more and more, what we found out is that landscape, that sort of infrastructure of our criminal legal system is not designed with clients and community in mind. It's not designed to uplift and empower, and it's not designed to be fair at all. So sometimes we keep being on the right side of things and having the wrong outcomes. But if you change the rules, then you can hold them to the rules. And so that's why we began to move in that direction. We needed to change the landscape. And the way we did that, the way we built community trust in that was to do our first job really well and build relationships with our clients the way we envisioned from when we reformed our office. So there was a lot of just goodwill built by simply visiting your clients, going into communities and having them see, listen to, talk to investigators, me being on the stump at community neighborhood association meetings, talking about the criminal legal system, going to the legislature, meeting with legislators. And just being in people's homes, right? Like with every moment you have with a client's family is not just a moment to build a relationship and reassure them that you're working for their client, but also to educate them and let them know this is a different kind of office. And what we did was we took that sort of goodwill and began doing things that sort of validated our commitment to the community. So there were some activities we took part in. Our second line for equal justice, which we haven't been able to have for the last couple of years because of COVID, was a huge success every year and something folks look forward to every year. I think Illy came out one year.
I did. I was there. I kind of felt it was a great experience. My feet hurt, but it was a great experience.
Yeah, it's a longer walk than you think. I'll tell you that. And so, and for folks who don't know what a second line is, it's a walking parade and folks line the route. Some folks will join with you. We have a brass band. We do the walk, and then the end of the walk is back at Kermit Ruffin's mother-in-law lounge, where we all sort of have a little fellowship and talk to community and one another. So those were the kinds of things we were able to do, and that helped build our credibility in mobilizing folks for different legislative priorities. We were able to build based on our experience in the courts and our interactions with our community and our partners. And so we built a legislative agenda. We're able to show constituency with the number of partners we had and the number of community that was speaking in our favor. And that began to turn the tide. And we were able to see a lot of benefits, and we got to see the landscape change, not just in rules, but most recently in leadership. We were able to sort of till the soil, showing folks a different path or way again, building that constituency and changing leadership in some key places.
Can we talk? I want to talk, like the last thing you said was the change in leadership part, right? So one of the things, so I did have an opportunity in the second line, and I think at the time the unanimous juries legislation was up, right? And I felt I'm not even from Louisiana. I felt like I was part of that shift, right? That was a huge change in Louisiana. And so I felt like part of that movement, even though I'm in Georgia, I actually had to I was participating in educating people, right? When we talk about the change and shift in leadership, there was a big shift change in your city with the election of the new DA. Can you talk a little bit about, what role your office played in this electing this, the progressive DA? I know that our public defender offices sometimes don't get the shine for it. Can you talk about how your office helped move in direction to bring someone in that change of leadership that would ultimately help you do what your office needs to do for your clients?
Well, in a very direct way, we had a lot of staff working to elect some more progressive leadership in our criminal legal system, and our DA, Jason Williams, was one of those folks. And so prior to the election cycle, we were moving not just to mobilize to make sure decision makers made the right votes, but we were beginning to think about how do we participate locally in helping decide in a major way the decision makers, not just making sure they do the right thing, but getting the right people in to do the right thing. And it was a big shift, and one, quite honestly, we had talked about as an organization many times and were a little skittish. And then we just, to be honestly, had got so tired of the prior regime, the prior DA, prosecuting our staff for doing their jobs, being as harsh as he possibly could be to our Black and brown children, to our young men and women in the system. And we're like, we really do need to put some skin in the game on this. So one of the things we began to do is think about, okay, let's pull down meetings with candidates and talk about our interests and let them know what they are and what we want to see. But then we amped it up this year with some really sort of incubating some more political power from the office. So one of the things that happened is the NOLA Defenders for Equal Justice was created. And they began working for candidates, for progressive candidates, raising money, knocking on doors. And then we had some public defender candidates for judge and folks who were running, right? And it certainly caught the eye of a lot of folks. And so particularly with the DA's office, there were a number of DA candidates who were on the sort of spectrum of progressive, right? Because let's be clear, the work we had done previously had been so successful in changing the landscape. Everybody wanted to be called a progressive prosecutor. Everybody was all of a sudden progressive, no matter how many folks they put in jail, how long they put them in there. Everybody was progressive for this election. And part of it was us, part of it was this moment in history, this reckoning with equity and race. And Jason had the most solid record of support up to and including championing a parity ordinance through our city council when he was city council president. And so quite literally, there were those of us knocking on doors for him, raising money for him, and really engaged in his campaign. Folks were on his transition team when he was elected from our office and from NOLA Defenders for Equal Justice. So we were intimately involved in his campaign, and it proved to be successful. He came out with, of course, really strong win, and is now our new progressive DA.
So Derwyn, I want to pick up on that because, I remember coming to New Orleans in 2006. And New Orleans was not a place where any DA who called themselves progressive was going to get elected. Things have changed so much over 15 years. And I personally credit the work that OPD has done with a lot of that change. I mean, if you look at the thing that maybe was missing pre-Katrina that is present now, it is really a very different public defender office. So when I'm talking to people and people say, look at the progressive DA in New Orleans and giving the progressive DA so much credit. And I don't want to take any credit away from the good work that Jason Williams or other sort of more reform-minded DAs are doing. But it always troubles me that folks don't see behind that and understand that the work that your office has done for so many years has paved the way, has helped create an environment where that kind of change is possible. So I want to thank you, because you should know that there are some people that give y'all a lot of credit for a lot of the change that has happened in New Orleans. And I think part of that isn't just the DAs. You also talked about judges. And there are some judges now on the bench who have backgrounds as public defenders, who have more of a connection to the communities most impacted. I also think what y'all have done is helped pave the way for that. And I want to just ask you a quick question, but I want to point out for our listeners a conversation you and I have had on more than one occasion. You were running yourself for a judgeship, and I remember we talked, and I told you, Derwyn, I said, man, you would be an amazing judge. I said, but what terrifies me is a public defender office in New Orleans with you not at the helm. And I wondered out loud to you, would we be better off with Derwyn Bunton on the bench and someone maybe who isn't really as client-centered heading up the public defender office? I am a firm believer that although things didn't go the way we hoped in the election, we are fortunate to have you still sitting where you're sitting at the head of OPD. But having said that, I think we all agree that judges who have experience as public defenders bring a lot to the bench. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about why it is so important during these elections that people are looking at the backgrounds of judges and why people who have had experience with impacted communities, serving impacted communities, speaking up for impacted communities are so critical to be sitting in the seat where judges sit.
Well, I think there is a difference in a courtroom when there is a judge who has experience being proximate to clients and community. And that experience tempers the need or notion or desire to view community as sort of inputs or step ladders to more political success, or to build some sort of reputation, right? In some speeches, I talk about our clients being in many ways political prisoners, because folks make their names on our clients and how many clients they put in jail, how long they put them in jail for, and without acknowledging any story or humanity in our clients. And so changing that dynamic with public defenders whose sort of ethic, whose ethos is to stand next to and be with community, to understand and tell those stories and humanize those folks, to have them sitting on the dais, looking at the evidence, knowing what they know about our clients and community's interaction with law enforcement, knowing what they know about the struggles our clients and their families meet every day. I think you get different better, more creative outcomes for our clients. And right now, quite honestly, we're seeing that with members on the bench. We're seeing folks who are setting bonds where they have to set bonds in a range where clients and families can make those bonds without melting down all their jewelry or putting another mortgage on their home or getting an auntie to sell their car or something like that. We're seeing more of that. And what they used to do in the old days, right, is you could either choose a lawyer or you could choose to get out. And many judges used the fact that someone in their family could make bond as a means to deny them counsel. You got to go then find a lawyer. You're not indigent. You made bond. These judges don't do that. And we're seeing a jail population that is shrinking. We're seeing more people at home. And we're seeing a better test of evidence in courtrooms, and an appreciation and desire for more creative litigation. Because also back in the day, the expectation for us to simply be a speed bump on the way to the penitentiary. Like that's what, we're sort of, and I think we've both used this analogy before. It's like that old I Love Lucy episode where they got all the candy coming. Like our job is to try to wrap that candy as fast as we can so we can get out. And we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of that change. So I think getting the right folks in there, particularly on the bench, is incredibly important when we talk about the sort of outcomes for clients and community as they come in front of our criminal legal system.
So I'm going to take us back to voting because, we have some midterm elections coming up across the country. As a public defender, can you explain, let me back up a little. Everyone gets focused on the federal election, but a lot of the challenges we see in the criminal legal system happen on the state and local level. As a public defender, can you explain the importance of the voting in state and local elections?
Well, I have come to, I think a lot of us, particularly in sort of organizations with national reach, look at national elections and we're like mad at Trump all the time, or we're mad at McConnell all the time. But they're not setting minimum wage in Louisiana. They're not. There's a national minimum wage. That's great. But Louisiana can set its own. And that happens at the local level. Mitch McConnell didn't build our jail, right? That was done here by folks here. So in most of what affects us day to day, it's the local elections that have real importance. Policing policy for the New Orleans Police Department is not set by DOJ, not explicitly, because we are under a consent decree for that too right now. But what it means is we've got to get involved, and we've got to have folks who are experienced and who have knowledge of the criminal legal system in particular to get involved in local elections, because that's where most of what happens to us gets done, quite honestly. Your school, your church, your roads, your jail, your courthouse, your police, those are local decisions. And we need to have as many folks able to vote, particularly folks who have sort of experience in our sphere. We need those folks to get out, learn the issues, and vote. So, because if you want different, you've got to vote different. And we got to get that message out.
I want to pick up on that because I think your office has really exemplified, I think, a point that we often try to make, and that is that having good client-centered public defenders representing individual people in individual cases is critically important. And your office has certainly changed the culture in New Orleans when it comes to that. But But if that's the only way we see public defenders, we're viewing the power of public defenders too narrowly. That public defenders have the ability to step outside of the courtroom, to partner with community, to help drive broader systemic change. And again, I think you've modeled that. You and your office has modeled that. And there have been a couple of legislative victories relatively recently in Louisiana that your fingerprints, your office's fingerprints are on. I'm sure there are more than these, but two that stand out are, within the last 2-3 years, Louisiana ended felony disenfranchisement. In other words, the state gave people convicted of felonies back the right to vote. Also, there was a legislative victory ending the Jim Crow practice of non-unanimous jury verdicts, and certainly with respect to the voting rights, you played a supportive role. The organization that really led that effort was led by our friend Norris Henderson and his organization Vote. But you supported the community in that, and I think played an even more active role in the non-unanimous jury work. Can you share with the audience a little bit about how specifically you all did that work in those two examples in Louisiana, and more generally, how public defenders do play a role in driving change beyond the court?
That, thinking back on all of that, I'm really like, wow, we kind of did that. It was like, wow, like that just happened, right? And the things we did sort of specifically, one is we're very conscious and mindful to not get in front of community in ways that is sort of peacocking or drawing attention, right? We work very hard, the leadership in my office, and I remind the leadership in my office all the time when folks get a little anxious, is that community, those are voices that have the hardest time being heard, right? If I want to be heard, just being real and candid, and I tell my staff this all the time, if I want to be heard, I simply tell people, come listen to me. If I call a press conference, they'll show up, right? That's not necessarily true for our clients in our community. So when they get together and want to show their power, we want to help them do that and want to help them be out front. And so we wanted to make sure we were acting as good facilitators, walking with and at times behind community to support them, as opposed to getting out front, but performing when we're called upon. One small symbol of this was when we had protests like virtually every major city. And so there's a protest over police brutality, criminal legal system reform that's going on at City Hall. And across from City Hall, there was a report of shots fired. And the crowd rushed across what's called Duncan Plaza to discover an NOPD cruiser with a woman in the back of it. The crowd surrounded the cruiser and started chanting, started getting riled up. And what had been discovered is the woman in the car was not a suspect, but a witness. So they had detained a witness, a young Black woman. And folks are getting upset, and folks in the crowd were stopped and said, wait a minute, we need a public defender. Like, that's what rang out. Could you imagine rap 16 years ago? A crowd saying, we need a public defender.
I love it. I can't even imagine. Wow.
Like, we need a public defender, because they knew we were there. And so one of our supervisors stepped up, right? This is when community calls you, you perform, stepped up talked to the police and was like, look, she's not a suspect. You can't hold her like that. You don't have probable cause to detain her for any crime. And he's like, what? And he's like, yeah, like you can call who you need to call, but you're gonna have to let her go, right? So there was some shuffling back and forth. He opened his door, she got out. The crowd parted to let him drive away, and he drove away.
Wow.
That's the role we want to play with community. And that's what we did with unanimous juries. That's what we did with voting reform for those who were formerly incarcerated. We were a place where folks could do phone banking. That happened in our office. A lot of us participated, including me, calling people around the state to educate them about the ballot amendment. It was a part of our second line. There were a lot of signs to vote yes on Amendment 2. There were speeches at the steps of the courthouse from a lot of the organizers involved, and we were the folks who got all the permits, who scheduled the walk, who booked Kermits. But we weren't the folks trying to upstage community. Like we wanted to make sure that folks knew they had power behind them and that we understood that we were that power. And that's the thing I tell folks all the time. We are not powerless. When you have 25,000 people come through your office every year, in some of the toughest moments in their lives, and it's your job to take care of them. There is power in that, whether you want to admit it or not. And if you're not using it to do the best you can for your community, for your clients, then in my opinion, you're abusing it. You should find something else to do.
I just want to say one thing about that. Derwyn, you just gave me goosebumps, because you know how you had that, whoa, I can't believe. I remember that. I remember once again, that was the second line, and it was the community out there in front of that old, outdated, was it the jail? It was the courthouse?
Courthouse.
The courthouse. And Derwyn said, this is the courthouse. Danny Engelberg was standing next to me, who's a lawyer at LPD. And I said, people have to walk into this in the worst moment of their lives. And what I love about your office, and I wish, and I hope in my dream, and why we do Gideon's Promise, is that other public defender offices adopt this way of reimagining what public defense could be. Like really what your office is doing is innovative, it's creative, and it's reimagining what public defense should be.
No, I appreciate that. And we one of our favorite parts is the part that gives me pause every time. One of the favorite parts of the second line is going by the jail, because our clients inside can hear and some can see us.
Yeah.
And so there's always a pause where folks just straight up show out in front of the jail.
Yeah, they do.
They straight up show out. And I'm like, and we stopped there for a minute, and I'm like, y'all, we go get arrested. We need to keep it moving. And so far, it's been great.
Defender. We need a public defender, right?
It's been great though, and thank you for that.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So before Illy wraps up with the last question, I just want to point out for the audience that I want to say thank you, because I think you all have been so involved in every level of change in New Orleans. And for funders out there, for reformers out there, absolutely we have to invest in electing good candidates for judgeships, for DA. Absolutely we have to invest in promoting legislative action. But if that's done to the exclusion of investing in public defenders, in building the kind of public defender office that you've built in New Orleans, if it's done without that, those efforts fall short. That really good public defender offices can help create a landscape where those other victories are more likely to happen. So, Derwyn, I want to thank you for the work you've done that often goes unrecognized that your public defenders have done in New Orleans.
So lastly, Derwyn, I'm gonna leave you with this question to talk and say to everyone who's listening, what is the best way what can people do to support and help public defenders? What could we do and where can we find you?
All right. Well, the best thing you can do to support public defenders is, we need so many things, but the best thing you can do is volunteer and contribute, and that is to say, do it so that you can learn a little bit about the communities who are at risk and vulnerable in our system. So, providing yourself as a volunteer in the myriad ways that public defenders need help. Is one thing. You can also contribute resources to public defenders' offices and organizations that support us. For us, Gideon's Promise was the sort of well we went to when we wanted to change the culture of this office 16 years ago. And through successive waves of trained attorneys through the Gideon's Promise program, we were able to build a foundation that has held us together to this day, and one we have improved upon to bring us to this moment where we're affecting change in the ways we are affecting it right now. So find those organizations that may not be a public defender office, but are supporting public defenders, and contribute or volunteer with them as well. And you can find us at opdla.org. We're online. We're on Twitter at Orleans Defender. You can find me. I'm at dbunton44 on Twitter. And I'm also, what am I? I'm like chief. I have a Facebook page. It's like Chief Defender. My comms person makes me do all this stuff.
Yes, I know the feeling, Derwyn.
As your comms person, I'm sure makes you do all your stuff. But we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. I think we're on Instagram recently. And you'll find us posting information for the community, also making calls to action. That's where you can find us if you ever have any questions or just want to know different ways to get involved.
All right. Well, Derwyn Bunton, Chief Defender of the Orleans Public Defender in New Orleans, Louisiana, Nolens, Louisiana. I want to say thank you so much for joining Gideon's Promise, the podcast today. And just in true form and fashion, I am Ilham Askia.
And I'm Jonathan Rapping.
Wrapping it up.
Hey, Il, before we hit that outro, why don't you tell people how to order a copy of the book in your radio voice?
In my radio voice?
Yeah, in your radio voice.
Okay. Get your copy of Gideon's Promise, a public defender movement to transform criminal justice at Amazon, IndieBound, Beacon Press, or wherever books are sold. Pre-order today, and a portion of proceeds will help us support public defenders.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
Thank you for listening to Gideon's Promise, the podcast. For more information on the topics covered and featured guests, please visit our website at gideonspromise.org. And finally, please subscribe, share, and let us know what you think.